The nationalist movement was given a good head start by the early nationalists because of their methodology and how they shaped the early national movement. But the fact that the early nationalists had an innate belief on the British and their methods, in fact, gave a chance to the British to, give them false hopes and toy around, and also it made it easy for the British to not really pay any heed to the early nationalists because of their moderate methods. The moderate methods also allowed the British to not really consider the constitutional reforms or the reforms that the early nationalists were asking, from the British government. So the continuous repression from the British government and the non-active participation of the early nationalists in fact created a new generation of nationalists and protesters who came to be known as radicals or assertive nationalists. The assertive nationalists were created out of the fact, out of the entire idea that these were the youths who had been constantly repressed, constantly deprived of opportunities by the British, and they agreed to move ahead and join the national movement in order to gain Swaraj for themselves. So these Indians, these youths who were the assertive nationalists, were completely disillusioned by the British rule. Thus, we see there is a change in methodologies, leaving behind the older methods of petition and prayer that was followed by the early nationalists. The youth was now ready to come face to face with the British, thus giving way to the rise of assertive nationalism in India that started from 1905 and went on till 1918. Now, the factors that led to the failure of the moderates or the early nationalists in turn become the factors which caused the rise of the assertives. So the first fact was that the constitutional agitation methodology that the moderates took really had no effect on the British authorities, because they could readily shift down their appeals that the people made to the British, because they did not pay any heed to these early nationalists who took most non-violent methods and mostly begging for their rights. So the British thought that they would not be able to pose any sort of difficulty for the British, and that is why did not pay much heed to them. The fact that the expectations of the nationalists were constantly shattered by false hopes that was given by the British, and the British could be seen constantly toying around with giving what the Indians wanted. So the early nationalists and their moderate method could not really garner that sort of a response from the British as they thought so. So the British curbed the Indian representation in Calcutta Corporation and restricted freedom of speech, making it more difficult for the Indian movement, national movement, to proceed. So there were certain policies that were taken forward which constantly put Indian masses, Indian youth in the back seat and did not allow them to administer themselves. So that agitated the youth, and from there arose the basic factor that these early nationalists were not really able to take the Indian national movement forward, and they were not able to see, in fact, the true, colors of the British, who needed Indians to voice their opinion and to get on with a debacle right away with the British. Otherwise, the British would never really understand that the Indians wanted self-rule. The other factor majorly that impacted the rise of the assertives was that they could readily see that the British constantly neglected the Indian misery. They had a neglect for the Indian welfare, and that could be seen with something as extravagant as a Queen's Darbar that was held in 1896 and again in 1900s, where on one side India was facing bad famines and on the other Queen was being garnered with extravagance in India. So thousands were spent on Queen Victoria's Jubilee celebration, but little relief was provided for famines in India. As you can see the two contrasting pictures on your screens, that the extravagance that could be seen in the clip from Queen Victoria's Silver Jubilee, and on the other hand the famine and the situation that it had created in India. So they were also agitated, the assertives were also agitated with the fact that the youth was always kept out of services of their administrative rights. So we see that there is a constant discrimination that the Indians face. The Indians were in fact not allowed to travel in the same compartment, not allowed to stay where an Englishman stayed, and there was a constant racism that was faced by them that pushed the assertives to the wall, and now they were at a moment where they would take it on directly with the Britishers. So the Indian civil service was also dominated by Englishmen, and very few educated Indians got selected for the service, keeping it almost very elitist in sense. We see discriminatory signs like these were in abundance in British India. So, for example, here the sign says dogs and Indians are not allowed. Thus, we can understand that the Indians were discriminated against, and it was, not just in the areas of administration or offices that the Indians were discriminated against, but we could see that the Indians could not even avail the basic modes of transportation. For example, the coaches where the British Englishmen would sit, Indians were not allowed to sit in those coaches as well. So, systematic discrimination and systematic policies of discrimination and repression was something that the assertive nationalists understood, that this showcased the true face of the Britishers and the British government. They could understand that the repressive policies that Lord Curzon established and promoted by his divisive policy was something that brought forward the true nature of the British governance in India. So, for example, the Act of 1898, where a criminal offence to incite people against the British. So it was considered that it was a criminal offence if you talk to people about the British governance and how British governance was taking place. So the second is the Indian Official Secrets Act, where a muzzle was put on newspapers and others who criticized on British policies, thus putting a ban on the press, the way information could travel across, and the knowledge that people had to really gain. Now, Lord Curzon's policies, which also included the Universities Act, was all discriminatory in all of its senses and repressive more so, because universities were in fact beginning to become the hotbed of the protests that were rising due to the assertive nationalism. Now, the second blow to these policies, these repressive methodologies, was that of the decision to partition Bengal. But we also see the Calcutta Corporation Act of 1899, which reduced Indian members in the body and gave the British a majority position. Indian Universities Act of 1904, as we were discussing, discussing increased British control over Indian universities. So all these acts and methodologies that were taken by the British was to clamp down on the British youth, especially, that was now gaining a fervor in the Indian national movement. So the biggest blow was that of the partition of Bengal, the decision to partition Bengal in 1905 that was taken up by Lord Curzon, and it showed the communal divisive policy that the British wanted to take against the Indians to sort of divide them up between themselves. So we understand that the divisive repressive policies were also a major cause for the rise of the nationalists. So can you tell me, when did the British partition or decide to partition Bengal? Was it in 1905, 1906, 1904 or 1911? The correct answer will be 1905. So the assertive nationalists, as and when they, started to gain this entire idea of how the British really were and the true nature of the British, they realized the fact that India, because it was being led by the early nationalists and their moderate methodologies, had in fact lost that fervor, lost the self-determination, the self-consciousness and the self-confidence to move out and voice their opinions against the British. They also lost the self-realization of the fact that they were in fact being subdued by the British. So they had become the true blue servants of the British colonizers. So that was something that the assertive nationalism focused on. The assertive nationalists wanted to gain back, wanted the Indian masses to regain their self-consciousness and their self-determination to move to Swarajya. So the trio of Lal Bal Pal, who were Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Bipin Chandra Pal, they focused on the methods of assertive nationalism that gained and helped the Indians to gain the self-realization and self-confidence to move towards Swarajya, move towards self-governance. So people like Aurobindo Ghosh, Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Bipin Chandra Pal were forerunners of the assertive nationalism. So the assertive nationalism had, certain methodologies included in it, and they included masses from all social economic backgrounds. That was in fact a failure on the part of the early nationalists, and the assertive nationalists understood that with the masses in support of the political change, they would be able to garner mass support for a national movement that was to be India's national movement. Second is that this factor provided nationalist movement with the much needed vigor and efficiency. So the push that was required by the nationalist movement. Certain international events also appealed to the assertive nationalists. For example, the Russian defeat in the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 to 1905, the Ethiopians' victory over the Italian invaders, Boer's success in holding off the British attacks in 1899 to 1902 during the Boer Wars, and the Irish nationalists winning their freedom from the British. So all these events showed how the myth of European invincibility could be shattered. So this showed the Indians that even they had the capacity to throw off the yoke of British oppression. So they can understand the factor that all these changes that were happening internationally also framed the ideas of assertive nationalism, and in turn favored the rise of assertive nationalism in India. So quickly, if we try to recapitulate, moderate methods of early nationalists failed to bring any substantial change. Second, the British authorities tried to suppress the national movement. Third, the British ignored Indians who were suffering due to the famines. The fourth reason was that Indian faced racial and constant racial discrimination at the hands of the British. Fifth, Partition of Bengal happened to be a major blow that tried to weaken the nationalist movement. Then we see that the constant efforts of the younger section of the society at this point of time, in fact, gave a push to assertive nationalism. People like Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Bipin Chandra Pal, they formed the backing for assertive nationalism, and their efforts, benefited the national movement. The myth of the European invincibility was also broken and shattered due to several reverses that were faced by the European powers in the international scene. Thus, to clearly look at the objectives of the assertive nationalists, we understand that they focused on attainment of self-rule for Indians or Swaraj. But this self-rule was different. This self-rule was that they wanted the Indians to govern India, and it was to be India for Indians. Now, this idea was very different from that of the early nationalist moderate ideologies. So they wanted India for Indians. Thus, we can understand that the entire ideological base started to change with the assertive nationalists coming in the forefront when they realized that the older methods of prayers and petitions could not garner the support from the British, and also could not change the methods that the British was taking to govern India. Therefore, assertive nationalism, that of passive resistance, was taken. So passive resistance would mean that resisting with the idea of not begging but claiming. So passive resistance would ideally mean to take into their own hands non-violent methods to go ahead and gain what the goals that they set. So these assertive nationalists, like that of Lala Lajpat Rai, Tilak, Bipin Chandra Pal, formed the force for assertive nationalism, for passive resistance that could go into direct debacle with the British, so that self-rule or Swaraj was gained for the Indians. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly, learn via games, and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.